In this next session, we're going to focus a bit on the pink dollar and sort of ask, what are the actual opportunities here for business? Can we make some money out of being more diverse and being more inclusive? And what is it like being an LGBT-focused business? I'd just like to invite my panelists up onto stage. First, we have Joel Simkai, who's the founder and CEO of Grindr. If you sit down here, which is probably the world's best-known LGBT firm, certainly a very iconic brand. We also have Amanda McCluskey, who's the head of sustainable investment at Stewart Investors. Paul Thompson, who's the founder of Lgbt Capital, a financial firm focused on LGBT investment. And Daisuke Iwase from LifeNet, a Japanese life insurance company. Please welcome our guests for this session. So again, just a reminder at the start, please do send in your questions on Twitter or on the app, and also raise your hand later on and we'll try and come out. But just first to ask each of my panelists in turn, sort of what do you think about the business opportunity around LGBT? Are there any particular sources of profit that companies could attack that they haven't? And what's it like operating for those of you that do as a firm focused in this sector? Perhaps Joel, if we begin with you. So I mean, you founded what has become probably the world's most famous LGBT brand. What was that process like? Did you find that an obvious source of profit and some entrepreneurship?
Yeah, we've built a market, a business on gay men, gay, bisexual, and transgender men who weren't really served by any other service at the time, and so we found an easier way to meet. Certainly, being gay and finding other gay men is a big challenge for a lot of us, and it's a big market. And so we built this business basically just because no one was doing a good job at it, and we've been very successful with it and have been profitable for a number of years based on this business. And I think one of the interesting things is we found a niche and we found a new way to meet that if you look at today and you look at the dating and other services in the space are all doing very similar things now, where you now can use your phone to meet someone else, and so I think this is another great example of the LGBT community being trailblazers and really setting a great innovative solution to a problem that the general population just wasn't thinking about. And so there's numerous examples of this where we're kind of either trailblazers or early adopters or eager to solve problems and thinking outside the box. And so I think there's a lot of innovation coming out of our community.
And could you maybe tell us something about your business experience in Asia? Do you find you have different sorts of customers here? Do you find the regulatory environment different? Do you have more or less demand from advertisers?
So we're a global business. We have users in every single country, and we're very strong in different parts of the world. Asia is not our strongest market. We were actually banned by the Chinese government several years ago, and that obviously hurt our growth in China because we simply couldn't grow, and I think that hurt us in the region. The ban was lifted not too long ago, about over a year ago, and so we're doing better, but that certainly handicapped us for a while, and so that there's a challenge for us there. The bigger challenge for us in Asia is monetization, where we're seeing users not as willing to pay for our subscription service. Our ad business is not as strong as it is elsewhere. And so we're seeing tremendous growth in Brazil and other kind of Mexico, developing countries, doing fairly well here in Asia, but we're not seeing that growth that we're seeing elsewhere.
And do you find you have different competitors in Asia to elsewhere? I mean, do Asian startups that are trying to muscle in on the territory act differently to those in other regions?
So we've got local competitors everywhere with varying degrees of success. There's a very strong competitor in China that does quite well, but they have no business model. So they've got millions of users and zero revenue. So sure, I envy their user base, but I don't envy their business model. And so they're struggling to figure out how to monetize all those users, and they've raised tens of millions of dollars trying to do that. We've raised zero. We just sold a majority stake to a Chinese firm, actually, Kunlun, but we've done that with raising no capital, and we're able to become profitable based on the solid business that we have around the world. But a lot of firms in Asia are just struggling, in my space, are struggling to monetize. And I hear that across the board, that Chinese and users in India and different parts of the world aren't willing to pay in the levels they are in the US. So I think that's going to be a challenge for a lot of online businesses and probably businesses in general.
Right. Okay. Well, hopefully we'll come back later to some of the practical challenges. But just now to turn to Amanda to find out some of your thoughts. So, I mean, you're head of sustainable investment. So LGBT inclusiveness is one topic that you look for. I mean, do you look at that from an ethical perspective, or do you think that you can get high returns by looking for companies that have better policies?
For us, it's all about trying to gain an investment insight. So to be a responsible investor is to look at the broadest possible range of factors when you're making your investment decision. So not just looking at the back section of the annual report that has all the numbers, but looking at the front section as well, and understanding a company's strategy and how they operate in community in the broadest sense. I mean, I think it's unarguable that human capital and a company's approach to managing its human assets is a very relevant investment insight that a responsible investor should be looking to understand when allocating capital. So, of course, responsible investors should be looking at a company's approach to LGBT. It is, I think, a proxy for the broader human capital strategy. The two really important metrics in looking at a company's human capital is their staff turnover and their employee engagement. Staff turnover costs companies 1.5 times the salary of the person that they lose. Companies with high levels of employee engagement outperform those with lower levels of employee engagement. Companies that have diverse workforces have better performing businesses. And all of the research shows, well, most of the research shows that companies that are proactive in terms of their approach to LGBT employees have lower turnover, have higher engagement, and are clearly more diverse. And what I thought was really interesting as well is that engagement and decrease in turnover is not only in the LGBT employee base, it's across the whole employee base, particularly with the younger generation and the millennials. But I think it's also an investment insight outside of just human capital. Investors love to build big spreadsheets and make everything very complicated, but it basically comes down to growth and risk and your assumptions around growth and risk. And if you're a company that's being discriminatory against your customers as it comes to LGBT, be it through, I mean, goodness gracious, air miles. Of course you should let your air miles go to same-sex partners. But, discriminatory practices like that hurt the brand and also limit the size of the customer base for companies as well. So it should feed into your assumptions around growth. And it should feed into your assumptions around risk as well, particularly as it relates to cultural risk. And it's come up a little bit this morning in terms of what tone are you setting at a company if you're not allowing employees to come to work and be open about who they are. The study that Alan referenced, I was aghast at the fact that in Australia, 50% of LGBT employees come to work and don't feel that they can be open about that. I thought Australia would be much better, and Australia's near the top. It's just behind the Netherlands. But that's, what does that say about a company culture where people can't even be open about who they are? So how could they possibly be open about other broader business issues where they should feel empowered to speak up? One of the biggest challenges for companies is getting their employees to tell them when things are going badly. And if you don't set the tone of openness and transparency across everything, I think you're introducing a risk to your business.
It's a good angle, actually, that risk one. Do you have any examples from firms that maybe you've invested in or looked at of good practice that you think are worth highlighting?
Yeah, there's. We try to use it as a bit of a proxy, but we'd limit the size of our investment universe a lot if we screened out companies that were not good on LGBT. Just recently, a really sad anecdote came up with a company that is good on human capital in terms of diversity and employee empowerment, and said, our CEO of our Indonesia business is openly gay, so therefore we can't call him the CEO because that would be really bad politically. We've created another title for him. And I was just like, oh my goodness, how this is just it's terrible. So, it's not easy for companies, but then there's other really good positive examples. I mean, I think in India, where only 7% of employees feel they can be openly gay, big company conglomerates like Infosys, the Tata Group, and the Mahindra Group have very clear policies that they do not discriminate based on sexual preference. And I think that's wonderful. And to see that leadership in India and those three company groups we do invest in is an indication of their broader approach to human capital that I think is a proxy for quality of management. And at the end of the day, that's what we're doing. We're investing in people to allocate capital. So it's a proxy for quality of management.
Yeah, I think it's an issue that a lot of, especially multinational companies, face in Asia, which is how far to push the envelope, because pushing too far can provoke backlash. But then, of course, the dollar signs and the corporate voice are relatively strong in Asia and can, in some countries, hold quite a lot of sway. Next is to turn to Paul Thompson from LGBT Capital. So you founded this firm, I guess, because you saw a gap in the market where there was it trying to attract the capital of LGBT investors or trying to invest in LGBT-friendly firms? Where did you see the business case?
Well, we do a number of things, and we started off by actually looking at the market and trying to quantify, the LGBT market. Because the first thing people say to me, well, it's a small market. The other issue is it's a very difficult market to access. The very fact that a lot of people in this market are hidden. How do you market to people that are hidden? And so it's a very big challenge. So we started out by trying to size the market, and we produced statistics, and our current estimates are over 3 trillion. The current figure is 3.7 trillion.
Is that globally?
Global spend, US dollars in the LGBT market. Now, if you assume a very best 50% of that is hidden, how do you find that? And the sheer numbers, I think China is a fascinating example. And when I listen to Joel's story, I think it's absolutely amazing what Grindr has done. And from being actually banned in China to being acquired by a Chinese investor, the world is changing. And it's incredible how the power of the numbers can drive change. And our business started off on the basis that we are commercial. And the way Lee presented the numbers earlier on is very different to the way we present the numbers, because we believe the two need to work together. It's the power of the money you can make from this market that will support companies to say we should look at that market, as well as doing the right thing. And China, people say to me, China's a small, relatively small, undeveloped market. We think on our estimates, I haven't been to count everybody, but there's sort of 70 to 80 million LGBT people in China. And that's the size of the total population of Germany. It's not a small market. But how do you get to that market, and what kind of marketing strategies do you use to get to that market? So we have a number of business areas. We have a private equity business where we've invested in LGBT businesses, and we've had some successes and some not so strong successes, or I would say. We have a wealth management business. One of the things we've recently are actually in the process of launching is a wealth management business focused on the LGBT population, but finally launched in conjunction with a top-tier wealth management firm from the UK. It's a FTSE 100 firm. And as well as looking at how you access that market, what firms will say, and from a commercial perspective, you can understand why they're saying it, is, well, we understand that there is X to be gained from the LGBT market. If we actually launch that business, will that impact our non-LGBT business, which is very established? And a lot of discussion has gone on, and we believe that is no longer the case. The world has changed very significantly. But I think these kind of issues in terms of how people look at the LGBT market and how they go to a market that is incredibly big but is hidden are the real important factors in looking at how to address it. And I think I think what Grindr has done is amazing. By the way, Joel, I met my partner on Grindr. And we actually...
How much is that worth?
Sorry. Well, there are days when I am very happy about Grindr, and there are days when I want to throw the app on the floor. But mostly happy. And we have 2 little Grindr dogs as well as a result of that experience. But on a serious note, what Grindr has done is very interesting, because when you have an app, it can operate in a space where people can still be partly hidden. And so therefore, what Grindr and other such products have done is pull together huge databases of LGBT people, whether they're open or not open, and actually provide a platform for people to target that market. One final thing that we did, which follows on from your point, is we have an investment model which was developed based on diversity, and it actually screens companies from an LGBT diversity perspective. We worked with Credit Suisse on the Equality Index, which was the first part of that. And we can show that companies that have LGBT diversity will perform better than companies that don't, broadly, and that's a very big statement. Not because of LGBT diversity per se, but because it's an indicator of the fact that those companies do a lot of other things in a smarter way. So I'll stop.
It's actually a similar issue to what we were talking with Lee about before. What's that direction of causality? Do better policies cause better company performance, or are they an indicator of a good company? As next, let's move to Daisuke Iwase, who's from LifeNet, Japanese insurance company, and I mean, you were very groundbreaking in Japan, so conservative country and a conservative industry, but your life insurance firm was the first to offer benefits to LGBT customers.
So we're not necessarily an LGBT-specific life and health insurance company, but we're internet-based, very focused on the younger generation because the fact that we only use internet as a distribution channel. And last fall, we started an initiative whereby we decided to accept same-sex partners equal to legally married opposite-sex partners, which was relatively new for the Japanese financial services industry as a whole. So we, as an insurance company, we obviously analyzed the risks and also thought through the reward and decided that the rewards was much larger than the risks. What were the risks? One, there are underwriting issues. Are there health and other risks specific to the LGBT community? So the problem for us was just the lack of statistical data that was trustworthy to judge the long-term health risks of LGBT people. So there were certain numbers that said that suicide rate for gay people were meaningfully higher than other people. So we had to take that into account. Secondly, there were some operational risks in that at certain instances, non-legally bound spouses are not treated as legal spouses. So if your partner dies, the hospital may not issue you a death certificate, and we may not be able to obtain other legal materials that are necessary to process the claims. So how do we think about that issue? And then finally, there were reputation risks that was raised by my senior, older colleagues that were not raised by the younger colleagues, actually. So I realized that even in a country like Japan, where a lot of things tend to be conservative, there was a big disparity among generation about how we approach this issue. So those were the risks. But as we went through, we realized that most of the risks weren't true risks. Most of the issues were not unique to the LGBT community, but it was more an issue of non-legal spouses being treated disfavorably compared with legally married people. So we thought that it was a risk that was worth taking, and then the rewards. So I think the very direct consequence of announcing this, we have had new policies coming in from gay couples. Also, surprisingly, we heard from many of our existing policyholders who had designated their parents to be the beneficiaries of their life policies, that called us and told us how happy they were, and they wanted to change that from the beneficiary of the life policy from their parents to their partner. So that was good, but I think the market is still very immature. We have certain standards set by that the partners have to have lived together for a certain number of years, so we can judge them to be similar to legal marriage status. And we hear that it may be just the case in Japan, but not so many people have very stable partners that have lived together over a certain amount of time, maybe for social reasons or other reasons. There are people that are very close in an intimate relationship but still live apart from each other, and right now we have not treated them as legally equal to legal domestic partners. Secondly, we've had a positive boost from a marketing and branding standpoint. Our target customers are the young, urban, relatively progressive, internet-savvy people that tend to be better educated and that tend to be relatively wealthier than the national average. And we've had a very strong support from not just the LGBT community, but the people supporting them. So that has been a big plus. And then finally, I had one transgender person join my call center team. And we didn't introduce him, her as that, but I think my colleagues figured out when she made the self-introduction. There were issues about which washroom she should be using. So there are practical issues, but I think us making that first step actually initiated the move within the life insurance industry. Many of the big life insurance companies followed path in a more narrowly defined manner. So their rules are even still very strict. But I feel that the moves by private companies can actually create an atmosphere within the society, and as the more and more private institutions follow, that can have an influence on the public policy perspective. Now for us, the bigger issue is that on the public side, the tax treatment, the social security, because the non-legally married spouses are treated very disadvantageously compared with the legally bound spouses. I think there's still long way to go. So the tax exemption that's offered for life insurance policies for legally married spouses, basically tax-free, that is not offered for non-legally bound people. So the actual benefit they receive after tax would be much lower. So that's just one point. But I think the public system reflects a certain view of families and family values, and that tends to be very rigid and old. So I think that has to change, but the way it can change can be through small companies like us making that first step that can actually make that wave across the industry.
Okay. I'm going to come out to the audience for questions in a sec, so please get your thoughts ready and hands ready to go up in the air. But we've had one question from the app, which is how do you prevent LGBT market outreach from seeming opportunistic? Actually, and Daisuke, if you could start off with that, because I know that was a concern for your business.
So we announced exactly the same as the time that a local city, Shibuya, which is the most hip city in Tokyo, the local mayor announced an introduction of a same-sex marriage certificate, which requests all institutions to treat them equal as legally married partners. So there were concerns that people would just view us to be doing this just for marketing purposes or as opportunistic. And I think what we were very careful at was that first we told the story of how, when we started thinking about this, how we approached this, the effort and the time we put into studying this topic, just to show that we just didn't do it for a short-term marketing exercise. And I think also, secondly, the way we presented it, I think we kept it very low-key. I told the media that I did not think this was anything special or anything unique. It was something just treating or embracing a new form of family was what we were trying to do. So I think you have to be sincere about how you approach this topic, and if you're doing this more, if you're trying to take advantage of this from an opportunistic perspective, you do get the backlash from the public, so it can create negative branding. But we were very careful about how we approach that.
Okay, so I'll throw the floor open now to the audience. Would anybody like to bring up any issues about the pink dollar and how to get it? There's a question down the back.
Hi, actually I have a question about so basically for the LGBT community, what we fight actually is for treat equally and the same equal rights. However, when there are billions of pink dollars flowing in the market, and when we do marketing, we have to target a specific group of people. Is it possible that it's kind of marginalized of some group of people? Because the whole media, the whole society, we are trying to sell into group A. However, maybe some people is not based on the stereotype, they will be marginalized.
Let's repeat the question for those who are watching online. So in targeting LGBT consumers, do we risk marginalizing other groups indirectly? Any thoughts?
Well, I think it is becoming more and more accepted now to target the LGBT market. And I admire the firms that are prepared to say, we don't care. Goldman Sachs CEO actually went on record to say that he would lose clients if it actually meant doing the right thing with LGBT. And I think more and more people are beginning to realize that the reward of having good diversity and the effect of being able to target a very big market is worth the diminishing backlash that there might be in that market. But I think in Asian markets, and I suspect in Japan, it's more of an issue than it would be, say, in the US. And I think the whole thing about education and explaining, and in particular also letting companies realize just how big this market is and the success that they can potentially have from that market will really help support that. And I think it's also worth saying that it's not just how the mainstream consumer views it, it's also how does an LGBT person look at the products and services being offered. And I think the LGBT market is a discerning market, has to be respected. And I think companies that just go after the market have to make sure that they are providing products and services that are truly thought out, that really respect the LGBT market. And per the previous question, it's not just a token. You have to make sure that you back that up with the right products and services and the right support and client service. I mean, I've heard financial organizations tell me that they are very LGBT friendly, and then I go into a bank to open an account and with a partner, and they say, well, why are two men doing this, and so on and so forth. So you really have to walk the walk as well as talking the talk.
Yeah, I would just, from my perspective, it's just good business, right? I mean, the trend now is personalization, right? That you go buy a service or a product, and the more personalized it is, the more likely you're going to buy or engage in that service. And so, the more you know your customer, and the more you're adapting your pitch to them or your service to them, I think the better, right? And so, if you're selling life insurance, it's not one policy for everyone. Different people require different policies, and so the more different types of policies and different types of rules and requirements you have, the better you'll treat your customers. If you're checking into a hotel and it's two guys and the assumption is, oh, do you guys need two beds? No, that's my partner and we sleep in the same bed. I mean, making that guy or that couple uncomfortable when they check in, I mean, that's not good business, and same for a bank account. And so I think it's just good business to be aware of your customers and serve them and really cater to their needs. And I don't think that's revolutionary. I think that's just good business. And so the previous question about being opportunistic, I think that's fine. Be opportunistic about it. Find if most of us in this room are trying to make a profit. And so if you're trying to make a profit, Absolutely. The gay customer is a great customer. But you need to speak a different language. You can't just show ads of a man and a woman and 3 kids. You got to show an ad of 2 guys or 2 girls. Those things matter to us, right? And so you have to rethink the way you approach it. And also, by the way, another piece of advice: don't just use rainbow flags. There's a specific language that's very relevant, and rainbow flags are great. But so is just a picture of 2 guys, and maybe they're just holding hands, or maybe they're just 2 guys hanging out, right? That's very, very powerful, and so I think that's really, really important. There's a strong business case to do it, and I think that's great, and I think that's what drives innovation.
It actually links to a question we just had that's come up from the app. So the question has been, do you think Asian businesses have more to gain by engaging LGBT consumers as compared to in other markets? And I mean, there's a long history in economics of analysis kind of showing that discrimination is costly, going back even to the 50s and 60s, starting off with gender, but then moving on to others that, well, if there's a certain subgroup being discriminated against, well, as a firm, I can go and get some cheaper, high-quality workers, or perhaps attack some consumers that other people are ignoring. Amanda, maybe if I can ask you to take that one. I mean, you're looking at firms all around and thinking about what their opportunities are. Do you have any thoughts?
My first response to that was, well, there's a bit of a gap. And so the opportunity for a lot of Asian companies is to perhaps be the leader and to perhaps be the innovator. So if you look in the Indian context, where I mentioned before, Infosys, Tata Group and Mahindra have all come out very clearly sort of in support. They're leading, and I'm sure across many other Asian countries, because there isn't many in Southeast Asia that I could find that have come out with leadership positions that can put them at the forefront like Qantas is in Australia. That's an opportunity for Asian companies that is still there, which perhaps isn't there in developed markets where there's a lot more cynicism. Everybody's tried to have a go at it. They do it really badly sometimes, and perhaps in sort of an almost offensive way. So there is an opportunity for Asian companies to, I think, really show leadership, but perhaps because they're so far behind.
Other questions from the audience? One down the front right here. There's a microphone just making its way to you.
Hi, I'm Stephen with State Street. My question is for Joe, actually. You mentioned earlier about Grindr having difficulties in China, but also in some jurisdiction in Asia and in the world where being gay or LGBT is being targeted, such as Singapore or Brunei. How do you balance commercial goals with your app against client protection? And in some jurisdictions, it could be life or death, and against government regulations, government policies that could be very intrusive.
So the question is, in jurisdictions where maybe being LGBT or undertaking certain activities is illegal, how do you balance your desires to make a commercial profit in a situation where it might not be allowed?
Yeah, so it's a delicate balance. I mean, my working hypothesis is that the service that we provide is a good one, and allows gay men to meet, allows them to connect, allows them to come out of the closet and do a lot of different things. So that need of community and finding one another is so important, and so that's the goal that we operate under. Specifically, we're also we're a location-based service. We've got a lot of data, and so we've got an extra responsibility to safeguard that, and so that's something that we spend a lot of effort in securing. One of the things that we do in a host of countries where it's dangerous to be gay, we actually hide a lot of the information, distance information, and so it makes it much more difficult to find one another. But it also makes it more difficult for the government or anyone who's going to do anything bad. But it's a challenge, and I think we do our best to balance that. And again, we think it's a net good, and that these people, especially in these countries, they have no other outlet, right? And it's they live in fear. And so if we can help them find other gay men, that's life-changing for them.
Other questions from the audience? While the audience is warming up, Joel, maybe a follow-up on that one. I mean, obviously in countries where perhaps laws are more restrictive, I mean, a service that allows you to meet more anonymously, or like Grindr can perhaps have an extra attraction. Do you find you have levels of use maybe that are higher relative to what you'd expect in countries with stricter laws?
I'm not sure there's a correlation there. I mean, we haven't looked at it. There's both sides of the equation. It's easier for us to market in the U.S. and other countries where it's an open society. But certainly in a closed society where there are no gay bars and clubs, Grindr is their gay bar. It's their gay community. It's how they connect. One thing that we've done overall on this issue is we essentially woke up one day and realized we have access to millions of men around the world. A lot of them are hidden to marketers or just to everyone else. And so we realized that we have this huge community, and we said to ourselves, well, what happens if we aggregate them all together? And what happens if we get them all to speak in one voice? And once if we did that and try to achieve some good in this world. And so we launched Grindr for Equality, which essentially aggregates all our users and encourages them to do various types of things, whether it's call a politician, make a donation, know about an issue, sign a petition, and so we aggregate all our users and in the hope that in mass comes change. And we've done this in many countries around the world in the last few years with a lot of success in getting our users to be aware of issues and pushing for change. And that to me is, you see a lot of different ethics groups that kind of vote together and stick together, and then they become a lot more influential. And so our goal here is if we can stick together as a community, our influence increases, especially with these types of issues.
Had let's see, we've got a question over there. And actually, for those of you who are interested in the Economist research that I presented before, this guy was the lead author, so you can watch out for the crazy tie and go and bug him at lunch. Michael.
Thank you for the shout out. I actually also have a question for Joel. You mentioned that in some countries you will hide the user data so that it might not be accessible to government and whatnot. But does that mean that the data is completely gone? And I'm wondering if this can sort of tie into the recent imbroglio between Apple and the government in terms of just access to data overall. Is the data inaccessible by you and permanently inaccessible? And if governments do issue subpoenas and whatnot, will you cooperate? And maybe if you can comment sort of from a more technical aspect on that front. Thanks.
Sure. So one of the things that we don't do is we don't capture a lot of personal information, so we don't ask you for your name. You can give it to us. And so we're not really creating profiles that are highly personal. We don't ask you to upload a photo. You can. We recognize a lot of our users are closeted and don't want that their public identity given to us, and so we don't require that. So that's really kind of that's a big part of our policy, our privacy policy. We do store information. We do cooperate with authorities when there's a warrant or those types of things. But there's no case that I'm aware of that a government said, hey, we're going to go on a witch hunt, give us the records of all our users. We would not comply. I'd prefer to get banned in that country than ever comply with something like that. So, but there are day-to-day law enforcement issues that are not intrinsic to being gay that we obviously comply with.
Had a question come in from Twitter, which Paul, I'm going to direct over to you. How do LGBT-friendly companies influence the countries in which they operate, maybe where they don't have very LGBT-friendly policies at the government level?
My cynical answer is that the way they influence is actually by making money. and making other people realize that they can be successful, and this is a market that should be respected. I mean, we launched a trial a wealth management business in Hong Kong a while ago, and very quickly afterwards other people followed and did the same and sort of copied the approach on the basis that it wasn't necessarily supported by real service and experts and so on, but it showed to me that by doing that and creating an example that this can be successful, people will follow. And I do believe that companies and governments realizing that they can make money from this market will help influence change alongside the social stuff that says this is just the right thing to do. And one of the statistics we produce is tourism statistics, and if you take countries that are really heavy on GDP from a tourism perspective, you can get up to 1% of GDP that can be attributed to LGBT tourists, right? Now that's phenomenal. There is one, I think it's Thailand where that is actually the case, because Thailand generates something like 9% of its GDP from, and LGBT tourism as a percentage of overall tourism is greater than the broader market. And I think that can, really again have countries looking at it and saying, 1% of GDP is pretty significant, maybe we should look at this market. So for me, on a slightly cynical basis, it's the dollars that will influence and affect change.
Certainly does get people's attention. We've had a question come through from the app, which Amanda, I might ask you to give us your thoughts on, and it's about gay consumers and affordability. So in the session before with Lee, we heard about some of the wage differentials with LGBT customers. Maybe some earn more, some earn less. There's a perception certainly that LGBT customers are often more affluent, maybe more disposable income, or more likely to live in urban areas. Do you think that is actually the case, or is it more nuanced?
I think it's more nuanced, and we don't actually have the right data, because I think, as was mentioned earlier, it's also hidden, so we don't know. I mean, I'm from Surrey Hills in Sydney, and that's a certain sort of segment of affluent, very edgy consumers, trendsetters, all those kind of things. But then the data that was presented earlier and everything that we've heard in terms of discrimination and what that means in terms of ability to progress within some workplaces and some markets could mean that it's contrary to that. I think it comes down to something much more fundamental in the sort of first principle, and that it should be just about, let's not discriminate based on these things from either an employee perspective or a customer perspective, because that's just really stupid. You're saying to a whole community segment, we don't want to do business with you. I think that's crazy. And then let's start to get a better understanding of the data and the market opportunity. I think it's going to be different country to country. It's going to be different market to market as well.
All right, on that note, our time is up for this session. We're now going to have a short video, which is going to be looking at how LGBT inclusion affects the bottom line in companies. After that, we'll then have our lunch break, and we'll be back here at 2 o'clock for the start of the next session. Thank you very much.